Alright everybody, welcome back! So the update has finally dropped, and with it comes the F-20 Tigershark, which is highly anticipated. This is actually the first Rank 8 premium as well, and it goes for a hefty $75. So before I get into how exactly you want to play it, first of all, should you even buy it? To be upfront, I probably would not buy the F-20. Now, it's not a terrible premium by any means, it is a decent aircraft for its battle rating. The problem is the US has the F-5C, which has been the best premium in the US tech tree for a very long time and will continue to be so, at least up until rank 9 gets added to the game. And of course that hasn't happened, so for now at least, the cheaper alternative, because remember it is $10 cheaper, is the F-5C, which also has a higher SL modifier as well, and a much more favorable matchmaker because you're sitting at 10.3 instead of being in that top tier matchmaker where you're fighting stuff like MiG-29s, high tier F-16s, the F-15, the SE-27, and of course the Gripen. Now, when it comes to how to actually use the aircraft, which of course is what the video is on today, if you've already used the F-5, you pretty much have the hang of it. Now, the F-20 itself is an F-5 airframe. They basically were like, hey, let's take an F-5 and stick a much better engine in it. Of course, in this case, they put the F-18's engine in there. This gives it an overall better thrust-to-weight ratio than the F-5E, unless you can somehow get your F-5E up to 1,800 kilometers an hour, which, that's not going to happen. So what this means is that at basically every stage in flight, you are going to have greater acceleration than you previously did in the F-5, especially at those lower speeds, because as you can see, the thrust-to-weight on the F-5E is drastically lower, below around 1,400 kilometers an hour or so, which is going to be essentially all areas of flight, at least in AirBnB normally. Unfortunately though, the F-20 still does have that relatively poor low speed turn when compared to stuff like the F-16, which you are going to be seeing a lot of. And even against other aircraft, that aren't in F-16, stuff like this MiG-29 that I'm fighting right here, are close enough in low speed turning performance that if you get caught, with multiple enemies like I did right there, they can and will actually be able to somewhat turn with you. Now, if I was in a sustained 1v1 versus the MiG-29, the F-20 should win. Unfortunately, in this case, I had to deal with multiple other people and I did wind up damaged, so I am going to be dying here. Realistically, in an actual match, assuming you don't get caught with your entire team dead like I did right here, you're going to want to keep your speed up. If you can keep your speed above like Mach 0.9 or so, the F-5 airframe loves its high-speed energy retention. It will quite comfortably sit there. This way, just like, with your earlier F-5s, you can cruise around and you're in a nice little agile rat, and this thing does have some decent high-speed pull. So as long as you stay at those higher speeds, you are in a very good position. You just kind of got to make sure that you don't get into a super low speed sustained dogfight, because unlike the F-16, you are not able to just turn with basically everything except for a Gripen. Now, when it comes to the kit, a lot of people are going to be disagreeing here, but honestly, I don't think bringing the radar missiles is worth it. The Sparrow isn't in the best spot right now in the first place, and especially with the F-20, you actually have to give up to your sidewinders if you do decide to bring Sparrow. So unlike something like the F-16 where you can choose if you want to bring 6 9Ls or 4 and 2, if you bring the Sparrow, if you bring 2 of them at least, you are down to only 4 missiles. Now if you absolutely desperately want at least 1 radar missile, I would run maybe 5 missiles, so 4 AIM-9Ls and 1 Sparrow, but realistically I would personally choose to just run 6 AIM-9Ls. It's better to have 6 shots, and the 9L is a more reliable missile than the Sparrow right now at least. Especially since all that someone has to do is just fly low over terrain, and their missile is going to miss every single time. The guns are going to be very familiar to you if you used the M39s before, on something like the F-100 or the F-5C, and these are pretty good guns. Now, it is worse than the Vulcan. I would much rather have a Vulcan, but they have relatively decent velocity. They do good damage now after the real shatter fix. You can run whichever belt you want, really. I would recommend either air targets or ground targets, whatever works best for you. For me, at least, air targets has seemed to be the best option. You get 560 rounds, so you also have plenty of trigger time, so you can just spray for the most part and not really have to worry about running out of ammo. So when it comes to offense, you got yourself a nice little rat plane, with a decent kit and plenty of trigger time, but how about actually defending yourself? The RWR is exactly what we expect at top tier. A nice digital RWR is going to tell you exactly what you're looking at. In this case, right, I see a MiG-29 on there, AAA, all that good stuff. This is used for both air and ground RB. In air, at least, if you're trying to do BVR with those Sparrows, knowing what is shooting at you and if they have launched is a huge deal. And of course, this will do that. This thing also is very useful in ground RB, and we'll get more onto that later on. When it comes to the countermeasures dispenser, this has the same one as the F5E, and I've seen a lot of people talking about how it only has 45 countermeasures. That isn't as bad as it may sound, right? So the F-16, of course, has 60 countermeasures, and this is one of the few things that the F-20 actually does better. It gets more trigger presses than the F-16. Now, hear me out. So you may be thinking, well, Lee, how can it have more pops if it has less flares? Well, if you use the F5, you already know this, but it actually drops them individually. So the F-16, right, you have 60 countermeasures, and if you're only running flares, that means you get 30 pops, because it drops them 2 at a time. In the case of the F-20, and of course the F5E as well, they drop individually. So even though you only have 45 countermeasures, you actually get 50% more presses. Same thing if you're running chaff, you're going to get 22, 23 pops in the F-20, while you only get 15 in the F-16, which is kind of a big deal. Now, the next thing is a little bit less reliable, but this does seem to have the really tanky damage model that I remember when the F5 first came out. This, of course, could be placebo, but I have had this happen several times where I have just completely tanked a missile, and I can make it back to base like this. In this case, right, I have just lost my, my wing control, and the rudder is completely capable of rolling the F-20. So I'm actually going to keep flying around like this, and I'm going to kill this F-15 here in a couple minutes while missing my wing control, which is kind of nuts. The survivability wise, let's say if you're not the best player and you're trying to get something that will be a little more forgiving, this is a pretty decent option. That's about it for air, really. It's a pretty self-explanatory aircraft for the most part. Just fly it like an F5, try and keep it fast when you can, and you'll be set. Now, this is also useful in ground RB because it does come equipped with Mavericks, of course. Now, it doesn't have any of the new fancy Mavericks, it only gets the AGM-65B, but this is an alright kit for 12.0. Now, of course, it is worse than the F-16 Block 10 at the exact same BR, but if you don't have this battle rating yet, this is going to be your best option when it comes to CAS for ground RB, at least for the meantime, because I'm sure they'll add some more. You'll get access to 4 Mavericks and 2 AIM-9Ls, which is totally fine. And of course, you also have the nice fancy RWR as well to let you know whenever somebody does go ahead and spawn up in an AA. Your best bet with these Mavs, because as you saw, they aren't the most reliable when it comes to damage, is to try and attack top down whenever possible. And this also means you're much less likely to get spotted by AA, because their radar can't actually look up this high. I usually recommend running much lower on a fuel in ground RB. Just go ahead and get your Mavs off as fast as possible and then run back to base. And 8 minutes should be enough for you to drop 4 Mavericks. Once again, just like pretty much everything else about the F-20, it's just kind of mid at CAS. Like, it's not bad, but it's just kind of there. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, feel free to go ahead and hit the subscribe button so you'll catch more of my stuff in the future. What are y'all's thoughts on the F-20? Is it as lackluster as I'm making it out to be? Catch y'all next time. Peace, y'all.